All right, welcome everyone. March coming into spring here. I'm just going to go through our normal updates and introduction and such, and then we'll pass it off to Alan. Alan Hunt from the Musconetcong Watershed Association is going to talk to us about watershed councils today. Meeting is being recorded. You can access all meeting recordings at this resource page. These meetings are every third Thursday of the month, 2:30 to 3:30. Zoom link is always the same. Please save that for your records so that you can just join without the email reminders. Put it in your calendar if that helps. And feel free to pass the information on to others. Let me know if you have any folks that would like to be on the email distribution list to get reminders and such. I'll put them on that list. Just a reminder that folks who are attending these meetings are often working in the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, sometimes not directly in the DRWI, but they are working in the Delaware River Basin, and we have a few folks attending from outside the DRB. We're supporting these with the DRWI funds and Seesaw funds. The DRWI website is 4 states, 1 source. This EnviroDIY and community science monitoring work is just one component of the DRWI, a William Penn Foundation funded project. Seesaw, Consortium for Scientific Assistance to Watersheds, allows the Stroud Center to provide support to watershed groups in Pennsylvania. So feel free to be in touch if you would like support via that avenue. Goals for these meetings are simply a time for us to check in. We certainly provide updates from the Stroud Center, but mostly we generally have these presentations on science monitoring and watershed management. Today we're sort of in this realm of watershed management with Alan's talk on watershed councils. The team of people working on these meetings and community science at the Stroud Center, myself, Rachel Johnson, Krista Reeves, and Shannon Hicks. Carol Armstrong and George Seeds, 2 master watershed stewards, providing support as Stroud volunteers. And DRWI leads include John Jackson, Matt Earhart, and Dave Arscott at the Stroud Center. So primary goal with these, in terms of Stroud's role with EnviroDIY in the Delaware River Basin, as well as community science in general, is to support watershed groups in doing science and monitoring to suit their own purposes. Secondarily, the Stroud Center is doing data analysis and developing tools and resources to help groups do what they want to do in terms of data, science, monitoring, and watershed management. Just a few things to point out, acknowledging that there is a comprehensive EnviroDIY manual that has all kinds of information on station management. Actually, I think we have someone that needs to mute. And so this manual, build stations, manage stations, so on. Feel free to access that. I mentioned this website previously. You can either go to the Wiki Watershed site or go straight to this link, which takes you to this page that has a number of different resources. You can enter data from your field visits, access data sheets, access help resources, access the recorded monthly meetings and other presentations and recordings from conferences and workshops and such. Another update, just a reminder that the Stroud Center continues to support synoptic sampling projects, or as we've been calling them, snapshots or blitzes. looking at salt across watersheds via measuring chloride and conductivity, and then water temperature, particularly with regard to summer water temperature, hoping that there was already some groups that are lining up to do water temperature snapshots in the summer. So please feel free to be in touch if you would like to do any of that type of monitoring, and Stroud Center can provide assistance and guidance in that. We now have Ian Brastow, who is going to provide some updates from the recently formed local policy and practice work group. So I will stop share right now. And Ian, if you want to share your screen and go through those updates.
Sure. Sorry, I thought you incorporated them into your slides.
Oh, so... I did. Do you want me to just, I can do.
Yeah,
Here, let me just do that and just tell me when to
Sounds good.
Switch. Sorry, that was miscommunication.
No worries.
So I'll go to the next one. And there you go, Ian.
Thank you very much. All right, so a little bit of an update with the local policy and practice work group. We have included 2 new members, Carol Armstrong, who is a PA Master Watershed Steward, and Tally MacArthur, who is a part of the PA Environmental Council and PA Organization for Wet Watersheds and Rivers, both of which have Tally was unable to join us this most recent meeting. However, will be interested in joining us moving forward. David Manning and I had a chance to meet with her. She is roughly in the same area of talking to watersheds in PA in general about the best way to engage their local municipalities and government agencies to impact how the various watersheds are tackling issues that belong to the watershed. And I think that would go well for our next meeting. Our next meeting is Thursday, the 1st, and we have, I think we can go on to the next slide. Thank you. We have created a more solidified short-term goal, where our short-term goal is to use the data that we have been collecting with our EnviroDIY mayfly sensors, with conductivity, temperature, depth, and sometimes turbidity, to advise and influence municipal entities. Specifically, in our last meeting, we talked about one of the better ways of impacting the quality of our rivers in a positive light is by engaging on a land use level with the planning board and the zoning commissions. So we've been discussing how to better utilize and leverage our connections, create those types of connections with people in the local governments to leverage public land use or the land uses to benefit our river quality. And we can move on to the next slide. So we have set up a rough before meeting, in meeting, after meeting schedule, where we are going to focus on a specific topic for each particular meeting. The next one that we will be having will be on impervious cover and how that affects water quality. So before a meeting, we are collecting resources for to discuss that particular topic. And we read the other resources that are being prepared and collected with everyone's help. In the meeting itself, if there's a presenter, we'll have them present to us on that specific topic. And then we will discuss, based on our readings and the presentation, any ideas that we have about how to better leverage our data and communicate that with local entities. And then we will move on to discussing the next possible topic for the next meeting, and the discussion of other topics that are tangentially related to either what we want to accomplish, adjust our short-term goal or our long-term goal with new information. And then our after meeting goals are to, again, collect more resources for the next meeting, but also to update the EnviroDIY group as a whole. And that's basically what we covered in our most recent meeting. And our next one will be, again, the first Thursday of every month.
And Ian, the one other thing that I think we were considering for the next meeting was also to
Right.
start thinking about temperature and how to communicate that, in particular water temperature, that is, how to communicate that, when to communicate it, what information is going to be most useful
Right.
with municipalities, and how that may relate to some of the things you mentioned, such as zoning and riparian zones and stuff like that.
Yep, that is correct. And we are doing that partly so that we can align ourselves with the EnviroDIY trajectory for the planned meetings. And we're going to try to do that moving forward as well.
Great. Okay, that takes care of our updates. Any questions before we move on to Alan? Okay, we have Alan Hunt, who is Director of Policy and Grants at the Musconetcong Watershed Association. He's going to talk about their Musconetcong River Council that they have formed. And we presented him with a number of different questions that I think the group that Ian just reviewed had about this type of stuff. And I think Alan is going to address those and other things in his talk. So I will stop share and pass it off to Alan.
All right, you should all see a screen. This is Watershed Councils now. Is that working?
Got it.
All right. So I'm Alan Hunt. I work at the Musconetcong Watershed Association. I also live along the Musconetcong River. This is what the river looks like just down the road from me. It's probably going to get this nice, pearlescent green in about a week. So and then people are going to be out fishing. They're already out fishing now too. It's a real great watershed, and in terms of it has a variety of scenic qualities to it. Most of it looks like this. Sometimes the tree canopy is entirely covered. We've got a little historic districts along there too, and forested ridges and these agricultural valleys. So it's a place that I love to share and have an opportunity to share about. And this topic today is a real fun topic for me to do. So just so you know, I've got 2 grants to do today. I've got 3 congressional spending requests to do tomorrow. I've got NRCS coming out and looking at my invasive clearing for my riparian buffer, and I've got a chainsaw tonight. But I'm really excited to be here because it's a great topic. And so I want to break a rule for Zoom meetings. If you don't have a lot of background noise where you are, take yourself off mute. I want you to jump in because we all work on watersheds in some way. And I want to hear from you kind of some of your experiences too about watershed management and get your ideas going about councils. Because I got some great questions that came from the local policy practice group. And, if we need to dive in a little bit deeper on something, let's just go do that and just keep things lively here. I want to practice. Okay. Take yourself off mute. If you want to interrupt me, this is what I want you to do. Say, hey, Alan. All right, so everyone say, hey, Alan, together.
Hey, Alan.
Alan.
All right, one more time. One,
Hey,
two.
Alan.
Hey, Alan.
All right.
Hey,
All right, so I know you can all do it, and I know you're off mute. So if you need to interrupt and you got a question, that's what I want you to do, okay?
Got it.
So we're gonna get going through here. I have like 20 slides. It's not a whole ton. But like I said, if you've got a question, let me know. All right, let's get this moving along. Yep. All right. So the Musconetcong Watershed is a tributary to the Delaware, right? We're New Jersey's largest tributary to the Delaware. We're about 156 miles long, 156 square miles, 46 miles long. We're long and skinny. We've got a ton of first, second, third order streams. And watersheds just don't really conform to much that people do. They're their own thing, and they're really driven by geology. And I mention that because if you look at our watershed here, if you look kind of at the top, we've got lakes. And then the river runs on down and it gets skinnier and we hit the Delaware. It also doesn't run north-south. It's actually on this angle. It's actually canted a little bit more than this. And so even just showing this or explaining to someone or putting on a map just becomes a little bit awkward because it just doesn't convey to the way that we people are used to looking at stuff. So I just want to make that point that whatever we do in the watershed is really driven by geology. It's driven by, where we've got the bedrock, where glaciation happened, what our, slope is and how fast the water is going to be going or how slow it's going to be going. So, really it's the geology that drives the system. And when it comes to watershed management, everything literally, and pun intended, flows from there. And so it's really about understanding that geography. Here's our watershed, set a little bit straighter, and it has some key things going on here, where people settled, place names, roads, things like that. And, when we think about watershed management, this is all what grounds us and why you might want to counsel or not want to counsel. Look at this, is that if geology is driving it, well, that's going to drive what your water quality is. Like we have arsenic in our water because of our bedrock. What we were going to have for bacteria or some, plant life in the rivers can be driven by the natural nutrients there. And then whatever layers, people put over this for roads or housing, whatever they use for water infrastructure, right? How our natural resources are used and have been used. We've been inhabited for 13,000 years. There's good evidence that a lot of our watershed was open in terms of grasslands because people actively managed it through fire by the time that settlers came through. So all this affects, the water quality conditions and how it's managed. The geography affected where the roads went through because there were certain gaps that allowed people to pass through mountains. Those gaps are ancient riverbeds from 2 million years ago, right? So it's that the geography and the geology defines kind of what the resources were, how, the depth for the soil, for the forest, where people moved through, where people settled, etc. And then we get this overlay of political boundaries. And they don't really match up really that well with the geology, the gaps, the roads, the forests, anything like that. And we also have this huge amount of cultural usage in the watershed from all the different people who've used it in the past, people who are using it now, and how different ways that people use it. And what that leads you towards is that if you're going to do watershed management, you're always going to deal with geography, and it requires you to deal with political boundaries and culture. You have to deal with the human stuff and its interrelation with the natural stuff. In many cases, like in our watershed, the river is the dividing line because it was convenient to use that for map making to enable, the divvying up of property. I think even for Native Americans who lived here, it may not have even been managed as a whole resource then. Certain routes would have been a trade route because there was a gap, and maybe people lived differently up in the mountainous part than down by the Delaware. So, we're trying to manage a resource collaboratively that doesn't lend itself very easily to do that. And throughout all the folks who have lived here and people who live here now, there's cultural differences in how the land is used. So I just kind of want to set the ground for that. And so the basis for the Watershed Council idea is that you're trying to capture all this. You're trying to capture, okay, we're going to manage the geography as a whole unit. We've got to somehow work across these political boundaries because the water's flowing through all them. We've got these different cultural uses going on. And it means you've got to collaborate to manage as a whole resource. And that's really where the Watershed Council idea comes from. All right, how's everyone feeling? We all kind of grounded in why watershed management takes a collaborative approach and kind of where councils have come from as a thought.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent.
All right, good.
Terrific. And I just want to say your focus very high up. You're not looking directly at the screen. I guess your screen's quite above.
That is correct. Yep. If I look down, I'm going to get a crick in my neck, and I'm going to be looking at a screen smaller than a sheet of paper, and I'm going to be very unhappy. So that's right.
Hey,
yes, I
Alan?
end up looking a little bit above the camera.
Alan, quick question. How do you determine the boundary of the green in your image? Is that elevation, or what defines the green?
Great question. So that is the top of the drainage divide for our watershed, right?
I
So
see.
it's linking together all the highest elevations and drawing a line across all them. And then
Yeah.
on the other side of the green, the water drains to different watersheds on
Got
the. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, can that chart just be made larger? I'm trying to get it to. It's hard to read some of it.
The one on the right.
Yeah, yeah. With the green and the blue, can that be blown up a bit?
Okay, so green and the blue. So I've got some rectangles here over the map, and I've got a list on the right, both of which I could see being small if you have a small screen. Which one? I can read it out for now.
Oh, now it looks good. I did my own correction on it. Thanks.
All right, excellent. Any other
Great.
questions? All right. All right, so where do we see watershed council? So I started with a list here, and I'm really wanting to hear kind of what you've seen for things that might be like a watershed council. And I go through this list because there's a lot of things that manage water that aren't quite holistic or very satisfactory, but they do sometimes fill that niche. So in New Jersey, we do have a couple of public commissions that are lake commissions, which will be managing a lake with the different political entities that are in it. So for example, Lake Hopatcong, our headwater, has 4 municipalities and 2 counties, and they're part of a commission. We have another lake that's like that, Lake Musconetcong, is a regional planning commission, and there's a number like that. There's also interstate commissions. And the lake commissions really came about for different reasons, sometimes to manage water levels, because these are recreational lakes. You need enough water for the boats, to not get stuck in the ground or hitting something. Sometimes it's about water quality. Sometimes it's about, managing recreation. You get interstate commissions like the Delaware River Basin Commission, right? That really comes around because, New York City is using water in the upper watershed and diverting it from the Delaware River and sending it to a different watershed. And that affects all the downstream users who might be expecting that water flow. But then that's also adjusted to think about, well, how do you have enough water so that Philadelphia's water intakes don't get salt water in them, or that you're managing enough water for the thermal cooling capacity needed for power plants in the basin, right? So on a very high level, the Delaware River Basin Commission does function like a watershed management entity. They even effectively manage water quality on the main stem of the Delaware in lieu of the Clean Water Act. Sometimes in our work, we see kind of these temporary entities formed. And this is especially true if you're doing non-point source pollution reduction and you're using Clean Water Act funding called the 319H program to develop a watershed implementation plan. They ask you to form an advisory council, stakeholders and municipalities along the way. But when the project ends, those councils may not continue. Is anyone involved in one of those right now? Krista is. Yeah, we're trying to form one. You'll see these infrastructure-driven entities. Sometimes a reservoir system, like the New Jersey Water Supply Authority, manages parts of the Delaware River to provide the Raritan River to provide water flow for the water intakes for New Brunswick, New Jersey. There's a reservoir system for that. They're thinking about water quality and quantity, and non-point source pollution control, but maybe not everything else that goes into that, like zoning and ordinances. Out west, you'll see bigger water supply and dam systems, thinking about like the Colorado River or the Columbia River, the Klamath, the upper Mississippi or the Mississippi itself with its lock and canal system. And you see there's sometimes navigation entities that get involved in water management because they have to maintain the systems. Yeah, go ahead.
Speaking of the West, should we be forming a watershed council so that we avoid what's happening out West with the overdevelopment?
So, that's a great question. In New Jersey, we do have a regional commission, and this is by way of answering that for the New Jersey Highlands. So about 850,000 acres. It splits between watersheds draining towards the Atlantic in New York, and the Hudson River and the Delaware River. That came about because the water supply is finite. Even though most of these systems use groundwater and some use surface water, but a lot of the surface water actually goes to for reservoirs for cities like Newark that are outside the Highlands region. When they did a master plan for that region, what they've basically found is that it's at carrying capacity, right? For its water supply, for the residents there, for the water supply that's promised and already permitted for export out of that region. And then also just what the land can support in terms of wastewater management, like dilution rates of septic systems. Like in our forest regions, it's 88 acres for one septic system in terms of dilution. In the better parts where our soils are a little bit better, it's still like 3.5 acres. So do we need water supply councils like in the East where we have different water laws than out West? I think that the situation with the Highlands indicates, yeah, probably we do. Even with climate change and getting more surface water, more rainwater, we seem to be at capacity, even if it doesn't look like that. So yeah, it is an important issue, and each state is supposed to have a water planning process as required in the Clean Water Act. And so I don't know what the corollary is in Pennsylvania or New York or Delaware, but all your states should be planning for water availability, for wastewater use, industrial use, and drinking water use already. I hope that kind of answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Has anyone got some examples here of these types of entities that manage water that maybe they're more familiar with? Let's toss a couple of them out.
Well, in Pennsylvania, there's the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission.
Okay. And do you know what they focus on?
Fish.
Fish, boats, recreation, right? Yeah.
Yeah. There's also organizations that are dedicated to the preservation of freshwater resources, like Trout Unlimited.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So
and they have lots of members. Yeah.
Yeah. So like Trout Unlimited is you'll see a little later on a partner for our River Management Council. They're a real great group to engage. And then something like the Fish and Boat Commission, if I recall, they're often involved in setting the standards for surface water quality use, right? So primary contact recreation like swimming, or secondary contact like wading or boating. But I think there's other agencies.
Yeah. They talk about the health of the fish health of streams as well.
That's right. Right, so that they're going to be working at a state level, right? And Pennsylvania's got some great watersheds aside from the Delaware, like the Susquehanna, right? So a lot of that flows from New York, from Pennsylvania and into the Chesapeake Bay, right? So you have a big watershed basin management there with the Chesapeake Bay Commission.
Would there not be
From
parallel organizations in New York or New Jersey rather?
Right. So the Chesapeake Bay Commission and the Chesapeake Bay example, like when I went for my master's in environmental management, like that's the classic one that's used as an example of a multi-state watershed basin, it's effectively a council, like for managing these resources. Yeah.
This is
Alan,
Tally from Power. Sorry, Alan, were you asking like what kind of councils are there in Pennsylvania, similar to what you have on this list?
Yeah, I'm asking like, what are your touchstones when you think about this, or ones that you think are, well, they got part of it, but not enough?
I mean, there's SRBC, of course. You were just talking about the Susquehanna, so same as just very similar to DRBC. There's also municipalities that form councils. So, for example, in Center County, there's Spring Creek Municipal Watershed Council. So basically all the municipalities in the Spring Creek watershed get together and they created like a one water plan. They meet and have presentations and issues all around the Spring Creek watershed in Center County. I'm sure people are familiar with stormwater management kind of councils that exist where you have multiple municipalities coming together to meet their MS4 requirements kind of together as opposed to individually. So, I mean, those are and we definitely have lake management councils similar to the ones that you mentioned. So those all exist. I don't know that I would consider the Fish and Boat Commission exactly a council, but probably play some of the same roles. And of course we have council of governments, many council of governments in Pennsylvania.
Yep. Alex Jackson here. One thing Pennsylvania also has is through the Authorities Act, there's various water authorities. So for example, there's the Bethlehem Water Authority, there's the Broadhead Creek Regional Authority, and they're sort of in the business of selling water to some degree, but they're also in the business of preserving land sometimes to deliver their product because they recognize that, they recognize the relationship. And, it's a question, which of these has, there's regulatory authority, and then there's, other authorities as well. And, in Pennsylvania, there's like the DRBC, the PADEP, and then the individual municipalities have broad overreaching power, even though it's more indirect and not as obvious on setting policies to protect water quality.
Right.
Also, this is George Seeds. Chester County has the Chester County Water Resources Authority, which is like a county-sponsored authority that manages. They have like stormwater and water quality and a certain amount of water supply management and so forth. Water quality.
Yeah, so I'm guessing with a lot of these that folks are mentioning, right, they come about from, water supply, like drinking water supply and trying to protect it. You get it for, sewer authorities, right? Sometimes they're trying to limit the impervious coverage so that they don't get as much stormwater runoff in. We get it where we have some of these interstate issues, like we mentioned, some of these big river basins. Then we also get places where they do have the authority and they're trying to do the right thing, whether that, their power only goes to their municipal boundary or only to the county boundary, but they're trying to do the right thing, right? It's still just a piece of the puzzle though. I'm going to give you a couple examples. I'm going to talk about the wild scenic rivers a little bit later on in a little bit detail. I'm going to give you...
Alan, may I just say one thing, Grace Woodard? I'm involved with our New York EnviroDIY in Deer Park Rural Alliance. We're participating with Sullivan County, Friends of the Upper Delaware, in a new project, the Never Sink Delaware Management Initiative. And I have to say that your first 10 minutes have been so good and better than the last 3 Zoom hours I've had on their site. Thank you.
Oh my, well, that's quite a high compliment, and I need to go talk with them. I'll go do that too.
Sure. Oh, love to. That was the next thing.
Sure. I know there's been some interest on the Never Sink and looking at the Wild Scenic River designation too there. Let me move on here because I want to share a couple examples that are my own touchstones for this, and it's really good to hear what other folks' touchstones are. Massachusetts has a very interesting way that they've set up watershed councils across the state, and it's something that they basically required out of their state law. Massachusetts created this division of water supply protection, right? So they're thinking about drinking water, but they're talking about watersheds. They're thinking about water rights, and they want to make sure that there's pure water, right? So we're really thinking about drinking water and really good quality ecological water. And they're thinking about it for the future too. So this is about, water supply, water availability. They set up advisory committees, and the advisory committees have some special provisions that aren't as related to the water supply that get more holistic, right? They're looking at fishing, boating, recreation, environment, and wildlife. And these committees are usually a couple municipalities, like usually like a headwaters section of a big river before it joins in. It's a branch of a river system before it joins into a larger river system. And they meet regularly. I know a number that meet more than twice a year is indicated here. And it's the municipal officials who come together to talk about watershed planning. And every 5 years, they have to renew a watershed management plan for the segment of the river and lakes that are in their jurisdiction. So this really forces a continual discussion about watershed management at the municipal level in conjunction, in dialogue with what the state's doing, right? So it's not just like the municipalities are on their own and the state's on its own, right? Everybody's kind of working to update these plans on a regular basis. And the citations down there, you'll get the slides after, and you can explore it a little bit yourself. An example I ran across when I went in college in Maine was a council of governments model. So I think, Talia, you mentioned this. New Jersey has no councils of government. Nobody uses that model in New Jersey. And I think there's about 600, 700 across the country. And I think it is actually a really pretty good model. Again, the state enabled the formation of regional planning organizations. It's not mandatory, but it said that here's a new type of political entity, right? You have counties, you have municipalities. Well, there's these regional planning organizations. And if you decide to form them, you need to have at least like 4 to 6 municipalities get together to do this. And then when they form them, they have certain powers. And the river that I lived along there was the Androscoggin River, big river in Maine, dammed, has paper industry on it. And I suspect this formation in 1962 has quite a bit to do with water quality, because paper mills really don't have a history of being good actors in terms of the water quality that they discharge. So the counties got together and the municipalities formed this regional planning organization as a non-for-profit. So it doesn't actually sit above the municipalities or the counties, but it's not hierarchical, it's sideways, right? So it's really them pooling their resources to hire planners to do their planning work for zoning, ordinances, transportation, environment, water, all that, rather than each municipality paying their own planner, right, on probably a part-time basis, like what happens in New Jersey. And then as a result, you don't get any planning because no one's paying for it. And then you get all these issues where somebody put the industrial thing that no one likes at the edge of the municipality that annoys the people in that other municipality. This model kind of prevents a lot of that boundary issue problems because everybody's talking in dialogue again. And I brought out this one point here that they do environmental management, and they actually have a whole river management plan that's adopted by the counties and the municipalities within their jurisdiction. So it's a really neat way of doing watershed planning as a subset of all these other planning responsibilities that they have. And it came about likely because of the environmental impacts to that river system. All right. I'm going to talk about river management councils next. Anyone got any quick questions on Massachusetts or Maine as examples?
Alan, I would only comment that under the municipal planning code in Pennsylvania, that same regional plan is allowable, and they do have certain powers if more than 3 municipalities get together. So I believe that law is also in place in Pennsylvania.
That's great, and frankly, I'm jealous because we don't have that in New Jersey. Anybody else? All right, so I'm going to talk about wild scenic rivers. The reason why wild and scenic rivers have councils is because they didn't have councils in the beginning. So in our watershed, this was ground zero for this. The National Park Service had been acquiring land through the, well, it wound up getting the land from the Tox Island Dam project. I mean, that's really what happened with this. And they made it a wild scenic river. And the Wild Scenic River program, which comes from the Wild Scenic River Act in 1968, National Act, enabled the federal government to, protect waters, whether they were on private or public land, and it allowed for the federal land acquisition, including through condemnation, along the river. That's not what happened on the Delaware. What happened was, the Army Corps had done the condemnation, they got the land. I think it was Army Corps, but it's a detail that's not going to matter for this story. And then they transfer it to the Park Service once the dam wasn't going to be built. So the Park Service then had enabling legislation for the Delaware to become wild and scenic in this section, what's called the Middle Delaware Wild Scenic River. And that obviously annoyed a whole bunch of people. And people, basically were forced to move somewhere else because their land was condemned. A lot of folks went upriver into New York State and, further north in the Poconos. And folks thought, well, let's protect the upper Delaware. And people marched. No NPS, get NPS out. They didn't want the Wild Scenic River designation. So what happened with that designation was, instead of a big federal land acquisition, there's only about 30 acres, and they create a council. And the National Park Service is on the council with the municipalities. And the municipalities have a say in how that river is managed through that segment. The Park Service was like, oh, this is better, but it still annoyed people a lot. And the Park Service isn't in the business of annoying people. And they're looking at all these wild scenic rivers being designated out west, and they're saying, well, how do we have a footprint for this out east? And they came up with this idea of partnership wild and scenic rivers, where the federal government wouldn't acquire any land or have any direct management responsibility, but still Congress could designate the river as being a nationally significant river. And that's where the Musconetcong wound up being designated in 2006. The first one, does anyone know the first partnership wild scenic river that was designated? It is in New Jersey. It's a Great Egg Harbor River, so a coastal river down near Ocean City, if you're familiar with the Jersey Shore. It was designated in 1992. And now there's 18 of these rivers. And I'm going to talk about the council model that's used with them. So here's a map of where some of those other rivers are. So I mentioned the Middle Delaware that's here. The Upper Delaware is there. The Lower Delaware has segments that are designated. Here's the Musconetcong. We've also got the White Clay Creek Watershed. There's one of the largest wild and scenic river designations. Actually, it's the largest east of the Mississippi. It's over 200 miles. This is the Great Egg Harbor River system, and then there's the Morris River here. 18 in total. And only one of these is directly federally, 2 of these are directly federally managed, the Middle Delaware and the Upper Delaware. The rest are the partnership ones. So here's the way it works with the Wild and Scenic River Act. First, you have to determine if it's eligible to be designated. And if it is eligible, you need to determine a feasibility study. Well, which means basically, if we were to designate it, what are the really significant resources here? Who would manage it? What are the management issues? How much funding would it take? How would you ensure the water quality isn't going to be degraded? These are all the type of management questions that get surfaced in the feasibility study. And then they come up with a river management plan. And at the same time that this was going on in our river got its first TMDL for bacteria. And it's mostly because of increasing suburbanization, use of septic systems, some livestock operations. But the water quality really got worse once agriculture declined. So it might be counterintuitive to some folks, but if you think about New Jersey and housing density, and you're putting too many houses together with older septic systems and no wastewater treatment plants, you're going to have a bacteria problem. And, you know, we went through this, we got all of our plan, and we're waiting and we're waiting and we're waiting for Congress to designate, and it finally happened in 2016. 2006. You know, so for us, that was a 15-year journey. People first thought of this in 1991. And the way it worked, this was not a holistic designation either. Right, so here we are back at looking at the whole watershed, but only segments of this river were thought of eligible and suitable for wild scenic designation. So we've got three parts. We've got a little 3-mile section up here. We've got basically 20-mile section in here in the middle part of the watershed, and a little 4-mile section here. It's about 2/3 of the river system that's designated wild and scenic. And as I'm illustrating, our wild and scenic segment is only 3 out of 4 counties in our watershed and 15 out of the 26 municipalities we have in the watershed. We only have 1.5% of New Jersey's land area, but we've got 6% of the municipalities. And we've got about 20% of the counties. Right? So when you try to manage something collaboratively, like your organizing costs, your outreach costs is very high, because usually the municipal and political boundaries are much bigger than your watershed area is. Means you're always organizing a lot of people. So the council was required for our wild and scenic designation. That's how, you know, the National Park Service knows somebody's going to carry out the river management plan. It's an advisory committee, and the National Park Service is the only one that has a regulatory role with regard to the federal responsibilities of the Wild and Scenic River Act. So that means that the Park Service looked at zoning. The Park Service looked at ordinances to make sure that they were compatible with protecting the water quality so it wouldn't degrade. But the Park Service isn't there telling the municipalities, oh, that ordinance you changed, it really needs to be, you know, better, or it got worse. That's the council's job. It's not the Park Service's job to advise on local zoning decisions. So the way our council's set up, each of the municipalities that's in the Wild Scenic River segments has a voting seat automatically. If somebody else wants to join in, and we do have 2 townships that joined in that were headwaters, they can have a voting seat too, and we just adjust that in our bylaws. We allow 4 voting counties, even though there's 3 in the designated area. We just gave DEP a vote, our Department of Environmental Protection, last year. We have 3 non-governmental organizations on our council. We've got us, Trout Unlimited, right? So folks who said Trout Unlimited are a great partner. We think they are a great partner too. And North Jersey RSC&D, so a farm conservation organization. So we're multi-level, right? 3 different levels of government. We're public and private because we have the NGOs. And we're cross-sector, right? We've got recreation, we've got environmental, we've got agriculture. That's really important when you think about the perspectives you need to manage a watershed. We have non-voting members, so these are people on our email list who regularly attend, but they don't vote. We have some folks from regional planning commissions on there, 2 regional planning commissions, the sub-agencies of DEP, so parks, wildlife, and we had invited the nonprofit for one of our state-recognized tribes that has heritage in our area too. And they're publicly advertised. Advertise these at the start of each year, publish them in the newspaper, they're on the website, and the public can attend. That doesn't usually happen, but every now and then someone does come in and you know, wants to see what's going on. Any questions about how we're organized and structured? I'm going to shift into what we actually do next. All right, I'm going to keep going. So here's the way it works. There's a paid administrator, that's me. There's supporting staff, that's Krista and the rest of our staff to help implement the management plan. The people on the council are volunteers. They're usually the township committee, so elected or appointed environmental commissioners, open space committee members, planning board, or sometimes it's the paid staff for those committees, like the paid staff who's the open space coordinator. We meet regularly. And we have 4 standing committees that'll do deep dives whenever we need to. They meet on an ad hoc basis. And by advisory, what does it mean we do? We'll do resolutions of support for projects that people are doing or for actions that the council wants people to take. They'll do public comment letters on individual permits or for grant proposals or for management plans. And then they might also issue an advisory letter. We have an invasive snail, and we want all the towns to know about it because it could be spread by recreational use. We want people to take part in the management. And the Park Service, they're really our funder, and they do technical assistance. They help us out, but they don't vote. Right? So that's that tension of, the federal government's enabling all this to protect the resource, but the onus is really on, the local folks in the council. Yep, so I mentioned we're working in an advisory role. We did a signage project. We put up interpretive panels. We've worked with our Native American tribes and sharing information about our Native American history. And it's really an information sharing venue. And through that, we do share information about, zoning, ordinances, management plans. We had one town share a management plan for managing deer on their public open space, and they wanted to share that experience with others. We've gone to one of our sewage treatment plants, so sometimes we'll do tours. Does somebody have a question they want to ask? All right, keep going because I'm watching the clock a little here. Some of the other stuff that we wind up doing is promotion. We want to tell people we have a great resource and try to encourage them to protect it. And that's a key thing for the Park Service, right? It promotes recreation, and recreation on these rivers is a key hook for building interest. So we're making a National Park Service brochure. We're allowed to do that. It's really neat. So there's one of the drafts of that brochure there. We also can access some other federal resources for grants like from the National Park Foundation for trails or other planning support. And we have done some zoning work. We hired a contractor to look at all the riverfront zoning, and they made an online ArcGIS map. You can zoom in and zoom out, right? This has all the codes for the zoning in there. And if you click on it, it explains what all those codes mean. We did analysis of the town's different ordinances. So that's what this little spiral graph is here, right? So this town, Alamucci Township, you can find all your towns on this. They have a good riparian buffer ordinance, good flood hazard, but they're not doing anything on habitat management really, or stream restoration, right? It shows that they could do some improvement there. And for each town, this looks different. And this is on our website. As I mentioned, we do the promotion because it's a really good way of getting people engaged. We do this through signage, outreach events, film festival, the citizen science program that Krista manages, the River Watcher, and we try to bring people out through the watershed through hikes and paddling trips. And we also do talk about when there's resource conflicts. During COVID, when there was a lot of concern about recreational overuse, we brought in all of our recreation management agencies that had land along the river, state, county, municipal. We talked about it, and they just shared ideas about what to do. Flooding's definitely an issue on our river, and there's also questions about appropriate land use near the river too. So what works and what doesn't work? One of the key things, and you've probably gotten this, is that people see the river as an important resource. Being a National Wild Scenic River is like winning the river popularity contest for the country, right? It's 0.25% of the rivers are eligible for this. And it helps motivate local capacity, right? There's a way for people to engage, especially if they like meetings or they like doing water quality work. It validates our work as an entity. When we have these relationships with the municipality, when we need them, like for a letter of support for a grant, we can raise awareness of issues and we can identify conflicts. But our challenges are that it's voluntary, so not everyone participates. I really don't have a sense about what our river counselors do with their municipalities. I know some go to like each of their meetings and they stand up and they give a report each month. And some, they're really hoping that their environmental commission doesn't get canceled by their township, and they're really trying to be the shortest blade of grass. So there's all ranges of interaction. We've got a big geography and we're at a big metro region. And really there's too much going on and it's too fast for the capacity that's available for an NGO to do and monitor what all those municipalities are doing for master plan updates that happen every 3 years, stormwater ordinances that need to be updated every couple of years, right? It's just too much throughput. And we can't go deep enough either. Like, these towns really need hand-holding to redo their master plan in a way that thinks about the river, or redo an ordinance. And then there's just turnover. What makes it work? I think what you'll see from the presentation today is usually some legal grounding to establish a river management council. You need staff. It needs to be someone's full-time job thinking about this stuff. That means it needs money. It needs people to participate, whether they're paid or volunteers. You have to have a big idea. What are you managing the resource for? You want to promote the good stuff, and you want to measure what you're doing. But there's things we can't do. We don't have any legal authority to compel anyone to do anything, to make everyone in the watershed participate or adopt minimum standards. We really can't set expectations. We can set a vision, but we can't set a goal and then have people meet the goal whatever way they want. And it's hard, like, we really can't manage a big enough decision-making process to go through everything that we would need to do to manage everything in the watershed. It's just too big, and we can't enforce anything. So those are the big thoughts I had on taking away on this. I want to give you some information. The Partnership Wild Scenic River Toolkit's there. Council of Government fact sheets is on our website for the Great Waters Project, where we do our municipal outreach. I'm going to give another river talk about the geography and how we wind up managing a settled landscape next month. There's also a journal article that a lot of the themes I identified here are in that published article that's in sustainability. So I'll stop there. I think we're at time. If folks want to take questions, they want to stay on, I can stay on for a bit, but I hope this was interesting and interactive for you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Alan. We are at our time to end, but I think if we have questions and it's okay with you, Alan, we could stay on a little longer.
Sure. Just say, hey, Alan.
Alan, when is that next talk of yours? Next month?
Yeah, April 4th.
April 4th.
Where is it? Is it open to anyone, or?
It's a virtual river talk. If you go to the Musconetcong website, we have an events tab pretty close to the top of the page, and you'll see it there and the registration information for it.
Perfect.
If Krista's really quick with typing and finding that, she might be able to drop it in the chat.
I'll drop it in the chat.
Oh, thanks.
Okay. Grace here. This was so excellent because the Never Sink Watershed plans initiative are just getting going and really need to focus on much of this. Down in Musconetcong, is the biggest problem getting municipal officers and officials to buy in with enthusiasm? That's the first part of the question. And if there is a problem, is it because it seems too overwhelming, or that, as you said, the message is not, dazzling enough, or promoted in a way that's useful?
Yeah, so the reason why we created the Waters Project, which you see the icon for there, is it felt like, our watershed's on the cusp of changing from the landscape that you see on the screen behind me. And we felt like we needed to remind people what makes our watershed great and different. It's the ephemeral stuff that's not in the Clean Water Act. It's the views, it's the recreation, it's the interaction that we have and feel as people. And then, that has to get translated through zoning. But we have municipal officials in towns that haven't really looked at their zoning in 40 years, right? They've done their master planning, they've checked the boxes. And like, I went to one planning board meeting, they were debating how they could spend $4,500 between two professionals to work on 2 bullet points of their master plan re-examination report. They spent 45 minutes of, an hour and a half long meeting figuring out who was going to get which part of that $4,500. Right. So if that's your capacity, you're not able to take on these bigger picture questions of where should our really big impervious coverage land uses be located? Should they be near the river and streams? Should they be located somewhere else? Where should we put our high density housing or affordable housing? Is it a place near infrastructure or away from infrastructure, right? They don't really have the space to talk about that. So that's where it takes more time in terms of hand-holding to get them to redo what they already have, because there's so much inertia from doing what they have, because there's just not any oxygen to talk about anything else, right? So that's the idea of like, let's put a worm on the hook and talk about recreation. Let's talk about ecosystem values. Let's get people thinking so that we can then have that more detailed conversation. But, we've got to bring on more resources to do that hand-holding. And that, that's why I'm writing grants today. trying to figure that out, right? I hope that answers your question.
Hey, Alan. Hey, Grace, I don't know
Yeah.
if you agree, but I don't see in our area that the town is even aware that there is a problem. They're just convinced that it's an infinite amount of water that's available and an infinite amount of development that can happen without any adverse effects. And I don't even know how to approach them anymore to tell them that that's probably not the case.
Well, David and Bert and Frank Coviello are working on that. We're starting small. We're focused on the salts and chlorides, and it's it's massaging the issue with them. Most of the zonings about Allen's in our area, we're in Deer Park, close to Port Jervis, and the Never Sink, of course, runs through our valley. The issue to me is that there is very little environmental education. And, the other day I thought, well, why not start with the Girl Scouts? It takes so much to move schools to get involved on a curriculum basis. But we do have a Mamakating Environmental Educational Center, and it's just picking up steam with all environmental programs. So I think it's the civics, the citizens, the residents, and sometimes they're the most alert and the town is the least alert.
Yeah. I mean, we see the same thing too. But, the folks who are on the township committees and some of the planning boards, they do live in the town or in the county, if it's a county planning board. And, some of them fish, some of them recreate, some of them are there because of the view and the landscape. So it's not always the science and the facts that convince people. And I'd say maybe rarely is it. It's more about the way things look and the way things feel. So I think sometimes the way that people are most motivated, it's sometimes historic resources, culture, pride, scenic resources. And there are other planning tools to address land use that impact water quality that are based on those. Like our regional planning commission allows for the designation of a scenic resource area. If you don't want to see a structure over a certain height, or if a structure is built, you want to have it to a certain visual standard, you want to preserve a certain view shed or corridor, you can define all that and put it in your ordinance and it's legally defensible. We've used some historic designations as a way to protect neighboring land use to the river. People where we are, if you try to replace one of the old metal truss bridges, people come out and they'll protest. They'll get in front of bulldozers. Not kidding. That has happened down my street. Actually, the bridge that this photo was taken from. So it's different leverage points in different communities. And it's not always science, despite what science-trained people may think, me being one of them.
Do you think it's a lot of it depends upon an openness to really market? marketing approaches, almost advertising approaches.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like what you need to do is you have to balance the scales, right? People know if we build this thing, it's so much, economic throughput in property tax, jobs, land value, or whatnot. But then they look at farmland and think, oh, it's vacant or forest. Well, how do you make that not a zero, right? That's the communication approach that we're trying in our watershed to try and balance the scales. Like that view behind me, I don't know. I mean, that's probably worth like $10 million in ecosystem services, just what you can see in the screen. Right? So how do you make someone see that so it's not zero?
Good points. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording and call an official end to the meeting right now, just for the sake of keeping things relatively on time. So stopping recording.